So we're about to put this Acer back together. Make sure we get all of our cables reconnected. Didn't disconnect just a whole bunch. Make sure you put the thing in as straight as you possibly can. You don't want to bend those pins. Alright. Got our inverter. So all the newer laptops are LED or DC, so they don't need to be inverted. And you guys can see here, this is a good example of this. So they have multiple layers, right? So the one at this bottom layer, there's two little arrows right there that point to those two screws. And then when we put the cover back on, there will be another one that goes through the cover and goes back into that center hole there because there's no arrow. Of course, not all of them are made that way. So there's about as many different laptops and designs out there as there are vehicles on the road, different types of vehicles. Every company just about has a different way of doing it. Alright, so then we take this, put it back on. And this is the cable for our microphone. So it lays back down nice and neat. Try to cable man as much as we can. Let's go back around, snap everything back down. This one snaps together a little bit easier than that Lenovo did. And put our covers back on. You always try to make it look like nobody's been in it. It's never been taken apart before. And of course, if these won't stick back down, you can get a small dab of contact cement, put on there. That's good. Okay, set that to the side. Put your screws there. Need to plumb some more parts back in here. And so we've got our power adapter. Just to come up and go back in. And we've got our modem. Plug in our power adapter. Keep that back out of the way. This one only has 2 screws in the motherboard. This layer. And the rest of them come through the top plate and go back down into it. And feed that one back through and put the top on. Put everything back in. Now let's go ahead and put our modem in. Plug that back up. Put that in place. So whenever you guys do this for a test, you have to take apart 2 desktop or a desktop and 2 laptops and leave them apart for 24 hours. And really, I'm testing, first off, you taking apart the laptops and desktop, but second off, being able to keep up with everything, not losing any parts, screws, things of that nature. It can get kind of complicated. So lay this in, make sure everything goes in nice and neat. Snap everything down. Let's plug our speakers back in. Just fold that cable down, get it out of the way. I use spudgers a lot doing this stuff. You don't want to use a screwdriver on that. Potential to tear the shielding on the outside of the cable. So we can go ahead and fish this back out for our power button. got a little piece of tape there, sticks it in place. Alright, so now let's get all of our ribbon cables plugged back in. And these have a line on them, just like the other ones did. You gotta make sure that you get that line lined up with the socket. And just one from one side to the other. Work that little wedge back in behind it. Same thing on these. It's a two-handed job for something like this. Alright, so like this, let's unplug that, and keyboard. So we'll go ahead and put our monitor on now. These have a socket they go down into. Of course, I've bent them as I got them out, so they're not quite lined up like they should be. Go ahead and bolt these in. Has a bit of a tricky spot here putting this back in. So you want to line it up with the socket. Before we start doing any kind of pushing in to get it inserted, make sure it's lined up really well. There we go. Alright, so it's in there, but it's not pushed in all the way. You guys see that? Now I just take my fingers and push it in the rest of the way. If you line it up in the socket first, you won't damage the pins. One of the first students I ever had to take a laptop apart, one of these anyway, he pushed it in kind of sideways and it bent all the pins over, and we started trying to bend them back out and broke every single one of them. So it's pretty important to just take your time. This is something you really can't rush. Let's go ahead and feed these last two through here. And they should come out the bottom. Cable management, keep them out of the way. Alright, so we've got our antennas routed through, a motherboard connection here for our power button and lights, power, modem, your touchpad and buttons, and then the buttons here on the side, all that stuff's plugged in. Video's plugged in, our speakers are plugged back up. So everything on the top side is done except for the motherboard. And of course the power button that goes on. One of the last things we do on here. So with this one, they go in at the bottom first. Just little feet that fit in the grooves. Just lay it down flat. And it's going to have little tabs that help hold it in on the side. Put some screws in here first. Just about made a mistake. This is a very important thing. Didn't plug up the motherboard. Alright, so this one is a wedge type as well. slide this in. It goes over the top of the wedge, not underneath it. Alright, so got that in place. Try to hold it there. Thing wasn't wanting to seat properly. Still not want to seat properly. It's maybe why the keyboard wasn't working. Make sure we got these out all the way. No, I think this one actually goes underneath it. Let's check it and see. Yep, it does. All right, so if you guys see that, I was trying to go over the top with it and it wouldn't go in. Went up underneath it and went in just fine. So we'll check that whenever we boot the machine out, make sure everything's working properly. All right. It's seated. This one has little ears, little clips right there at the bottom. Go in, snap it in place. All right, just close that up. Put that shut. So the first thing we put in is our wireless card. These are spring loaded as well. Okay. This little coaxial cable. I see people try to repair these and they don't realize that it's a coax. So there's a big glob of solder on them. You can't figure out why their wireless doesn't work. These things are so small, trying to repair them, it's almost impossible. You're better off to a lot of times just go through and just buy all new wireless antenna and cable. Of course, if you take it apart properly, you shouldn't tear them, so it should be fine. I trust you guys will do that. Okay. So put our RAM in. Just make sure it's seated. This is spring loaded as well. Make sure it seats in the bottom of the socket properly. DDR2. This one's wanting to catch a little bit on the side. Okay, so that's in. And our CPU, when it goes back in, there's a gold triangle here. It lines up with the triangle there on the side. Just make sure those two line back up the way they're supposed to when you put it in. This is a ZIF socket, so it should just fall into the socket. And it's in, flat. And I always try to move it back and forth just a little bit to make sure it's seated properly. Then we'll lock it back down. This happens a lot. People don't, they'll take it apart, but they won't lock the socket back in, so it's not actually making contact with the pins. And the machine goes to boot up, it can't boot because it doesn't have a CPU, right? Or it thinks it doesn't have a CPU. So, bottom's almost done. We've got our wireless card in, 2 RAM sticks, and our CPU. So now we'll go ahead and put our heat sink back in. And these have numbers on them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You tighten them back down in the proper configuration. We'll get them all started first. We'll go back and tighten them all up. Alright, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So another thing I see a lot is that the CPU fan isn't plugged back in. So you'll get a fan error as soon as you boot the machine up, saying the CPU fan's not working. So laptop, a CPU fan is really important. You know, they're important on a desktop as well, but not nearly as much as they are on a laptop. Laptops get really hot. Now they have some that are passively cooled. Some of the lower end laptops you guys can get are passively cooled. If the CPU is a lower wattage, it really doesn't need just a whole lot of cooling, so they have a big metal plate that covers the CPU, and it just dissipates heat to the bottom of the laptop that way. Alright, so CPU's back in, heat sink's back on, fan's back on, plug back in, everything's going the right direction. Fan spins just fine. One thing you don't want to do is, say you want to clean one of these out, you take some canned air or air compressor and you start blowing this fan. This fan will create power, and it's kind of like an alternator on your car. As it spins, it creates power, and you can be pumping power back into the board. It's not something you want to do. So anytime you want to blow one of these out, just stick something in the fan. You take one of the spudgers, stick it in the fan, and then use your compressed air to blow it. That way it'll blow it without actually spinning the fan blades there. Alright, so what's next? Let's go ahead and put our hard drive back in. This goes in back to the back, plugs into our SATA. And did not plug in the SATA. So now all the parts are back in. Our slot fillers back in. Roll them back up. Now we can start putting our screws back. Let's go ahead and put our DVD drive in. Get that out of the way. That's all of them. So with this one, since these are bigger in the back here, I'll put them in first. Just slide that one in. Alright, so the door's back in, everything's nice and flat, flush. Put our battery in. What do you want to bet the thing's dead? See if we can find a power adapter. That one there. Okay.
Got the Acer.
Yeah. Got one here. So if for your test, if I give you a working laptop, it has to work when you get done with it.
You hope so.
We hope it's going to work. This one, power adapter, remember was on the back. Power button's on. That's good.
So if you turn on, it starts smoking, it's a no-go.
Yeah, if it starts smoking, it's bad. So
IT 101, if it smokes, don't use it. Good.
I'm gonna start Windows normally.
Screen's so dirty.
Yeah, the screen's really dirty. You can see it booting up. I check and make sure the keyboard's working. Because that's the note I had that the keyboard wasn't working. So we're about to find out. Battery failure not holding the charge, possible keyboard replacement. Of course, this thing is 11 years old, so
That'll do it.
that'll do it. Got a cursor. It looks like they've spilled something on it. And it's rusty. So touchpad works.
Windows 7 Professional.
Yeah, it's a little old. Well, there you go, guys. That's how you rebuild this laptop.